Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when the most desperate scream of your life falls into the void? When the only person who should protect you chooses not to act, preferring to be a silent witness to your pain. Imagine a dark room, the night dragging on heavily, and a scream cutting through the silence, not a cry for help, but a scream that begs to be heard, for someone, anyone, to do something. But what happens when the one who should act just observes? My father watched everything and did nothing. This phrase weighs like a sentence, like an indelible mark engraved on the soul. It is the most deafening silence there is, the abandonment, that shapes monsters. Because the wound that opens at this moment is not just physical, it is a deep psychological scar, a shadow that grows without control, fed by impotence and betrayal. Can you feel this anguish? The emptiness of the gaze that does not react, the heart that stops beating and closes itself in a cocoon of pain and anger. The scene is repeated in millions of forgotten stories, silenced by fear, shame, or by the very choice of adults who decided not to face the horror. And this omission, this lack of intervention, generates consequences that go far beyond what we can imagine. Because the child who witnesses the horror and finds no protection does not disappear. He or she transforms. And often, he or she becomes what he or she should never have become, the monster. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and stir something you never knew existed within you. The weight of abandonment. The invisible wound that shapes a being marked by the silence of their own protectors. It's not just a story about a crime or a trauma. It's a deep investigation into the distorted mind of someone who grew up watching the world crumble around them, and about the cruel absence of the one who should have been their refuge. Have you ever felt the sensation of being invisible to those who should care the most? Of screaming and not being heard? This wound does not heal easily. It creates silent monsters who carry within themselves the shadow of a father who preferred to watch, inert, while hell happened inside his home. His silence is heavier than any sentence. It is a guilt that will never be judged, a violence that will never have a voice in the courts. But the question that remains is, how does this silence become an emotional death sentence? How does the absence of a simple gesture, a look that says, "I am here," transform a child into something that society fears? This wound, which should be healed by love and protection, becomes the fuel for a monster, a distorted reflection of abandonment, pain, and fear. This is not just an isolated case. These are real stories, often hidden behind closed doors, but that echo in every corner where the pain of abandonment screams unheard. And if you think this has no relation to what you are seeing today, think again. Because what you are about to hear here will change your perception of guilt, justice, and even redemption. If you've ever been through this, or know someone who has, you know that the path is tortuous and full of shadows. There are no easy answers. But understanding what happens when a father refuses to act can be the first step to unraveling a dark mystery that goes far beyond what meets the eye, and this mystery is about to be revealed. Stay until the end, because the truth that lies behind this silence may be even more terrifying than you imagine. The wound that shaped the monster still pulsates, and what comes next will open this abyss with cruel clarity. Prepare to enter a universe where abandonment is a sentence and silence is the cruelest torture. And what you are about to discover is just the beginning. But before we continue, I want you to think about the power that your presence here has. Every time someone subscribes, it's not just a number. It's a voice that says, "I want to know more, I want to understand. I want to expose these wounds that the world tries to hide." This is how we create a space where stories like this don't get buried in silence. Subscribing now is a guarantee that you won't miss the next chapter of this dark journey, where the layers of abandonment and pain will reveal themselves even deeper, with secrets that can mess with your head and your heart. So subscribe too, so you don't miss anything on the channel. Here, Each story is a mirror for those who have felt the emptiness of a gaze that did not protect them, for those who carry this heavy shadow and seek answers that no one had the courage to give. Therefore, if you feel that you need to understand what really hides behind a childhood marked by the silence of a father, sign up and be part of this search for the raw and unfiltered truth. You are not alone in this, and together we will uncover what lies behind this monster that the wound of abandonment has shaped. And believe me, what follows is not just any story. It is a dive into the darkest side of the human soul, where each revelation is a stab at hope and a key to understanding what many prefer to ignore. He was just a boy. A boy who liked to draw, to create worlds on paper, where monsters were figures. Born from imagination, from a simple desire to have fun, to escape reality. He didn't know it, but that innocent line carried a dark omen, because the monster he would one day draw with colored pencil, he himself would come to embody, sculpted by the pain that grew silently inside him. In that house, where the walls were supposed to hold laughter and safety, fear was a constant visitor. It made no noise, it did not scream, but it hid in the corners, in the shadows of the hallways, in the distant gaze of the boy who began to draw not to escape the world, but to try to make sense of the confusion he felt. Childhood trauma is not something revealed in a single night. It is a dark seed that germinates in silence, fed by neglect, omission, and unspoken words. He was a curious boy, but also a stranger to himself. He spent hours observing his father, the man who should have been his protector, but who preferred indifference to action. The father who watched the scene without even blinking, who did not offer the healing hug, who did not say a word to save a childhood that was about to break. And the father's silence was not just an absence in that moment, but an echo that reverberated in the boy's mind for years to come, shaping his mentality, his distorted vision of what is right and what is allowed. The drawings, once innocent, began to take on a different tone. The soft lines gave way to angular shapes, twisted faces, empty eyes. Each figure was a reflection of what he felt inside, but could not name. A silent scream that escaped from the tip of the pencil. A slow and cruel transformation that unfolded, without anyone noticing. What was art became a distorted mirror of his own suffering, a way of expressing the hidden truth that no one had the courage to face. Have you ever stopped to think about how decisions, or the lack thereof, shape destinies? How the silence of someone who should love you can become the fuel that ignites the flame of the inner monster? In that room where he drew, there was more than just paper. There was an internal battle, a dark journey that would take him to places few dare to look. Childhood, that sacred phase of transformation, was stolen by an invisible wound, and what was born from it was something that bore the scars of denial and abandonment. And this journey is not unique. Many people go through this, burying deep pain, masking trauma, and building facades to hide the traces of what should have been healed. The human mind is fascinating but also fragile. The impact of unlived experiences and denied affection creates cracks that can widen until they become dangerous fissures. In his search for meaning, the boy who drew monsters saw his own distorted reflection, and without knowing it, he began to become what he so feared. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding this transformation goes beyond a simple account. It is the immersion into the backstage of the human psyche, where decisions, absences, and unhealed wounds shape the character and destiny of a human being. Childhood trauma, especially when accompanied by the omission of those who should protect, leaves marks that defy logic, that alter the perception of reality and of one's own worth. The boy who once laughed and played, who drew monsters as if he were creating imaginary friends, grew up in the midst of a silent storm. Each line in his notebooks was a clue, a fragment of that story that no one dared to tell. He was preparing for the metamorphosis that pain and abandonment imposed, and this transformation had a price that many are not prepared to pay. And in the silence of that house, where the father watched everything and did nothing, a hidden truth began to take shape. A truth that would be revealed in pieces, in isolated phrases, in gestures that escaped common understanding. The monster did not appear out of nowhere. He was sculpted by invisible hands, fed by indifference, and the absence of love that should have been his shield. This is where the line between victim and something else blurs, where the past casts long shadows over the present. The boy who drew monsters is, in many ways, a reflection of the wounds he carried. And those wounds, though invisible to the world, were about to pierce the veil of normalcy and reveal a reality far darker than any drawing could convey. If you have ever felt the anguish of being invisible to those who should be caring, if you recognize this pain that corrodes you inside, write the word silence in the comments. I want to know who here carries this wound, who understands what it means to be left to fend for themselves in the face of horror. Because shared pain, even in simple words, is already a step towards the transformation we so desperately seek. To understand, now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because there is an instant that separates innocence from darkness, a moment so brief and devastating that no one heard the sound of the boy's soul breaking. It was that night, when his mother's screams pierced the walls like sharp knives, cutting through the air, tearing apart what was left of the house's security. Her cries were not just despair, they were a warning, an urgent plea for something to change, for his father to finally move, for protection to truly exist. But he stood there, motionless, as if the world around him were a distant movie, a spectacle he didn't want or couldn't be a part of. Imagine what it means for a child to witness chaos and feel that the only guardian who should be by their side has chosen to be a silent spectator. It is an abandonment that goes beyond any physical absence. It is the loneliness that envelops you even when there are people in the room. It is the helplessness that takes root in the mind, an invisible trauma that grows, strengthens, and begins to control everything. The father, who at that moment was the figure of authority, of security, has become the symbol of omission, of the greatest failure, of betrayal that no one forgives. That moment, the moment the boy's heart cracked, was the initial fissure that began a transformation. A piece of him broke, an essential part that might never be put back together again. And that wound, deep and silent, sat there, growing, fed by fear, resentment, and the knowledge that when he needed it most, he had been left alone. There are no words to describe the pain of this experience, because it is not just a common physical or emotional pain. It is a pain that permeates every thought, that shapes the mindset, and will impact decisions throughout life. It is the pain of family abandonment that contaminates what could be the safest place in the world, one's own home. And if you've ever felt something similar, if you've ever been left in the dark by those who were supposed to protect you, you know that this impact never goes away. It becomes part of your journey, a silent backdrop that influences every step, every choice. Even when we try to hide it, the truth hidden behind that silence is crueler than any explicit act of violence, because abandonment is a form of violence that corrodes from within, that steals hope and leaves an indelible mark. The revelations that emerge when we look back at that moment are not just about what happened in that house, but about the ripple effect that omission generates. When the father figure fails so profoundly, it creates a vacuum that the mind tries to fill, often with distorted images, fears, and resentments that accumulate and over time can explode in unpredictable ways. And it is at this point that we begin to understand the complexity of the boy's transformation into something that many would call a monster. He was not born that way, nor did he choose to be that way. He was shaped by a dark context where his father's abandonment was the starting point for a tortuous path, full of wrong decisions, unspoken pain, and desperate searches for some meaning. That night that was supposed to be just another episode became the milestone that defined a new reality. A reality where the child who once drew monsters saw his own world crumble in silence without anyone noticing the sound of that soul breaking. If you carry a painful memory, a cry that was ignored, or a wound that never healed, write the word broken in the comments. I want to know who here recognizes this pain that does not go away, that insists on existing even when we try to move on. Stay with me until the end, because what comes after this night is even more disturbing and revealing. The journey is far from over, and what you will discover may shake everything you believed about wounds, forgiveness, and hidden truth. The aftermath of that night brought no relief. In fact, it was the beginning of a screaming silence, an emptiness that occupied every corner of the house and the boy's mind. He no longer cried. The tears, which could have been a cry for help, dried up. The pain seemed so deep that not even sadness could reach it. Instead, something darker took over, a calm that frightened even those who watched from afar. The drawings began to change. The childish figures gave way to scenes of blood, violence, and monsters that didn't just exist on paper, but seemed to inhabit every thought. It was as if his mind needed to externalize what it couldn't say in words. Each line was a clue, a fragment of the internal storm that refused to calm down. And in the silence of the night, he slept with his eyes open, staring into the darkness as if trying to decipher the mysteries that life imposed on him. The psychological tension was a trap. The emotional void that took over was not just an absence. It was a dense, suffocating presence that prevented any attempt at escape or redemption. The boy had been shaped not only by what he saw, but mainly by what he did not hear, the hug that never came, the comfort that did not exist, the word that was never spoken. On his journey of transformation, he began to understand that silence can be a more cruel weapon than any physical aggression. He learned that the impact of the absence of affection is a hidden truth that many ignore, but that leaves deep, invisible marks that govern thoughts and shape decisions. What seems like just a case of family abandonment actually hides a universe of internal conflicts and silent battles. A universe where the monster he drew on paper is actually a reflection of the monster that was growing inside him, fueled by loneliness and the lack of a voice that said, "You are not alone." Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding what happens after that silence is fundamental to understanding the true dimension of transformation. It is an immersion behind the scenes of the mind that struggles to survive a pain that has no name, a mind that carries an invisible weight, and a silent thirst for justice and recognition. It is at this stage that the mindset begins to take shape, and the decisions made reflect the struggle between shadow and light. The boy who once believed in the power of drawings to express his pain begins to walk through a territory where fear and anger are constant companions, where the outside world seems distant and threatening. Every sleepless night, every restless thought, every bloody drawing on paper are fragments of a story that does not want to be forgotten, but that also does not find space to be told. It is a vicious cycle, a psychological labyrinth where the silence continues to scream, where the open wound insists on pulsing, and where the wounded child begins to glimpse the monster he will become. If you have ever felt this tension, this emptiness that cannot be put into words, or know someone who carries this mark, write the word echo in the comments. I want to know who here recognizes the sound of silence that screams inside them. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is there, behind the scenes of the mind marked by silence and pain, that the first signs of danger begin to emerge, those small warnings that no one wanted to see, that were muffled by denial and the normalization of horror. The boy who drew monsters and scenes of blood carried a trapped scream, a call for help that, although silent, tried to manifest itself in some way. And he chose a channel that seemed safe, notebooks. It was there that he poured out his darkest thoughts, his tortured words, fragments of a mind at war. Disturbing phrases written in the shaky handwriting of someone carrying a secret too heavy to carry alone. Words that spoke of fear, revolt, abandonment, but also of a rage that grew and fed on the silence of the adults around him. And as if it were a warning, a dead cat appeared in the neighborhood, a sign that could have set off an alarm, drawing attention to what was happening in that home. But the father, the same man who had watched everything and done nothing, chose to look the other way. He considered it all a nonsense, a childish whim, something that would pass with time. He ignored the signs, dismissed the danger, and normalized what should have been a cry for help. This is the devastating impact of inaction. It transforms danger into something invisible, a shadow that grows without anyone seeing it, a slow poison that contaminates the mind and heart. That boy's mentality began to take shape in an environment where what should have been dealt with urgently became a reason for neglect. The father's decision not to act was in fact fuel for the boy's transformation, a silent step towards a dark path that few understand. The hidden truth behind this behavior is one of the hardest secrets to face. How do you know when a cry for help becomes an ignored warning sign? How do you deal with the consequences of a choice that, even if it seems small, changes the course of a life forever? The father chose to deny reality, and that decision would carry a weight he could never have imagined. But what seems like an isolated scene, a forgotten episode, is actually a pivotal turning point in the boy's journey. The notebook, the dead cat, his father's dismissive response. These are all pieces that form a dark puzzle, a portrait of a corrupted childhood and a silent warning of what is to come. The transformation that occurs at this moment is profound. It is not just the perception of pain, but the construction of a mentality of distrust, fear, and revolt that will begin to guide the boy's decisions in the future. He learns, even without realizing it, that the world can be cruel, that help may not arrive, and that he needs to protect himself on his own, even if it means distancing himself from what remains of humanity within him. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding these early danger signs is essential to deciphering the backstage of a mind that is heading towards the abyss. It is at this point that the revelations begin that will shake up everything you imagine about guilt, responsibility, and the impact of choices made or not made by those who are supposed to love. It is a complex journey, full of layers and nuances, where denial is not just an act of disdain, but a desperate defense against the painful truth. And the father's silence, which before seemed like cowardice, reveals itself as a key piece of a larger puzzle, an echo of a story marked by wounds that never healed. If you've ever seen warning signs ignored, or if you know someone who has, or if you feel the weight of this denial, leave the word alarm in the comments. I want to know who here understands the profound impact of a warning left unheeded, and how that choice changes everything in the course of someone's life. The father's silence was not just an isolated act, it was the catalyst that fueled a growing darkness, a void that silently expanded, eroding what was left of that boy's childhood and hope. And that is precisely why stories like this deserve to be told and, above all, understood. If you feel that this kind of truth needs to be brought to light, that the weight of these wounds cannot remain hidden, know that your presence here makes all the difference. When you decide to follow this content, you are not just watching a story, you are helping to build a community that does not remain silent in the face of deep wounds, that wants to understand the transformation, the mentality, and the decisions that shape such difficult destinies. Each subscription here is a voice that echoes against the silence, a light that illuminates behind the scenes of these disturbing but necessary stories. Subscribing means you won't miss the next layers of this journey, because the hidden truth we're uncovering doesn't stop here. It will go deeper, revealing even more disturbing and painful aspects that touch on what's most human and, at the same time, darkest in us. It's a complex journey, full of revelations that deserves to be followed closely. So subscribe, because if you like this subject, you need to subscribe to the channel. If you want to continue understanding the impact that omission has on the formation of real monsters, if you want to delve into the decisions that led that boy down such a tortuous path, this is the right place. Your registration is not just a digital gesture, it is a form of belonging, a step towards ensuring that these stories are not forgotten, and so that, together, we can face the truth that many try to hide. The next stage of this narrative will open doors that are still locked, will show how much the pain of abandonment can reverberate in someone's life, and how small gestures, or the lack thereof, change everything. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the story you are following does not end in the silence of childhood or in the yellowed pages of a notebook with dark drawings. It goes on, advancing through the years with a frightening coldness that defies any expectation about who that boy, now a man, really became. Years after that night that shattered a childhood, a woman disappears. It is not just any detail, but the kind of event that reverberates, that leaves a trail of fear and mystery wherever it goes. A disappearance that for many would be a reason for panic, despair, and a rush to act. But for him, that man who carries the shadow of abandonment and paternal neglect, none of this seems to cause a tremor. At the police station, when asked questions, he remains motionless. There is no fear, no nervousness, nor the typical anxiety of someone in the crosshairs of justice. Only a calculated coldness that disconcerts, that frightens, and that casts even greater doubt on what is behind that empty look. And then, amidst the uncomfortable silence, he asks a question that cuts like a blade. Did she also have a father who witnessed everything? This sentence is a blow, not only because it reveals a dark and unexpected connection, but because it shows a man who knows exactly the weight of abandonment, who carries a deep pain and a revolt that seem to guide his steps or his crimes. It is a twist that was not in the script, which transforms what seemed to be a simple investigation into a tense psychological game, where past and present intertwine in a dangerous dance. The mystery grows, and with it, the tension that grips not only the police, but also those trying to understand the motivations behind acts that shock with their brutality and coldness. How can someone who was a victim of silence and omission turn into something so cruel? Where does the line between justice and revenge begin? This journey reveals not only a criminal, but a mind marked by wounds that never healed, who decided to act in a way that few can understand. In that interrogation room, time seems to freeze. The words spoken and unsaid become pieces of a puzzle that is still far from being completely assembled. Each answer, each gesture, each silence carries a hidden truth, an impact that reverberates in the decisions made long before that moment. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this man's transformation was not a coincidence. It was a complex construction, made up of layers of pain, rejection, anger, and a mentality shaped by the choices of those who should have protected him. This is a journey behind the scenes of the human mind, a territory where decisions and traumas mix in a tangle that is difficult to unravel. The real turning point lies in understanding that the wound of abandonment and silence has an impact that goes far beyond what we imagine. It can create monsters, but also questions about guilt, justice, and what it really means to be responsible for who we become. If you have ever felt the coldness of abandonment, or know someone whose life has been marked by this brutal absence, write the word coldness in the comments. I want to know who here recognizes this emptiness that scares, this silent revolt that can transform anyone into something we never imagined. Stay with me until the end, because this story still has a lot to reveal, and what comes next will challenge everything you think about forgiveness, justice, and the shadows we carry inside us. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, the victim's family, curious onlookers, people thirsty for blood, and people afraid of what they would hear. Everyone was waiting for a confession, a plea for forgiveness, any gesture that would show remorse. But he didn't seem shaken. He didn't even try to defend himself. He just stared into space, as if he already knew there was no point in saying anything else, or as if he was holding back something that others would never understand. The judge asks, the lawyers insist, the reporters write down every comma. And he, there, in the center of it all, finally opens his mouth. But what comes out is not an excuse, nor a denial. He just lets out a sentence that leaves the room silent. I'm not guilty. He is, and he points to his father. The impact was immediate. A shock, a brutal break in the expectations of everyone there. Because no one expected that. Instead of defending himself, he would accuse. And much less accuse his own father, the man who should have taught, protected, and prevented him. The public's reaction was a mixture of confusion and astonishment. Some thought it was a tactic, others, delirium. But there, in that cold, firm gaze, there was something that seemed sincere, unjustifiable, but loaded with a hidden truth that no one had the courage to face. Because it is easier to condemn the monster than to understand its origin. It is more convenient to punish the one who carried out the act than to investigate who shaped the mind behind it. And there he was, in front of everyone, pointing the finger at the figure who, years ago, remained motionless while the violence took place inside the walls of the house. The same man who ignored the dark drawings, who disregarded the signs, who treated it all as nonsense. The same man who chose silence while his son's pain screamed. It is in this reversal of blame that the trial takes another turn, because he is not trying to convince anyone that he is innocent. He wants the world to understand Bises became that. He wants everyone to know that abandonment, omission, indifference also kill. They also transform, they also destroy. What he does, there is not a defense. It is a revelation. And in a way, a call for justice for a pain that never had a voice. The trial is no longer just about the crime. It becomes a mirror. A space where each person, consciously or not, begins to think about the small guilts they carry. About what we failed to do. About the times we remained silent. About how many childhoods we have broken without even realizing it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this moment, where blame is shifted, where the truth begins to show, itself fragmented and confused, is where the greatest revelations emerge. Revelations that are not in the evidence, but in the subtext of what was experienced. And when he points to his father, he is saying much more than it seems. He is talking about entire generations that repeat patterns. About families that silence traumas. About small decisions that create gigantic wounds. The court did not know how to react. The judge called for order. Journalists looked at each other. And the father, sitting in the back of the room, shrank. For the first time, he could not look away. For the first time, perhaps, he felt the weight of what he did not do. Because silence takes its toll. Omission has an echo. And sometimes, those who seem innocent carry the heaviest guilt. If you've ever seen someone being blamed for something that didn't start on their own, if you've ever felt that kind of silent injustice eating away at you, write the word echo in the comments, because there are stories that continue to resonate long after the verdict. In the narrow cell, time seemed to stand still. The walls were colorless, the air was dense and still, as if even the oxygen inside prevented it from moving. He sat with his arms resting on his legs, his eyes fixed on an imaginary point, the kind of gaze of someone who is no longer imprisoned there, but somewhere in the past where it all began. The interviewer was waiting, tape recorder on, pen still on paper. This was his last chance. His last answer. And he knew it. The man took a deep breath. No emotion was apparent. No hesitation, just sharp, calculated words. I didn't kill out of hate. The sentence hung in the air like a sharp blade, surprising even those who thought they had heard. it all before. His voice didn't tremble. On the contrary, he seemed relieved to finally say it. I killed through a mirror. And he finished with a whisper that seemed like it wasn't meant for anyone else to hear. Each one of them was my childhood coming back. In that moment, everything changed. The cold narrative that had enveloped him gave way to something deeper, more confusing. He wasn't just talking about the victims, he was talking about himself. Every crime, every brutal act was a reflection, an unconscious repetition of everything that had been denied, ignored, stifled. It was as if the faces he saw were frames of his own pain. They weren't women, they were memories. They weren't bodies, they were scars dotted at this point in the journey that understanding mixes with discomfort. Because no matter how monstrous the action was, no matter how unforgivable what he did, there is a complexity there that cannot be denied. There is no attempt to justify, but there is an almost desperate effort to explain, to show that, in his mind, the past is not past. He was still trapped in that silent house. He still saw his father watching and doing nothing. He still heard the muffled screams, the cracks in the wall, his mother's cries smothered by fear. Confession comes as a belated cry, a revelation that mixes trauma, distortion, and a sick search for control. Because when everything you have experienced has been marked by impotence, growing up can mean, for some, finding power in the most brutal way. For him, each violent act was a gesture of recovery, a settling of accounts with his own childhood, a failed and tragic attempt to silence the echo that never ceased. His mind wasn't seeking redemption, it was seeking meaning. And when meaning is rooted in pain, the outcome is unpredictable. This is the hidden truth that many prefer not to see, because it's easier to label than to understand. Easier to condemn than to delve into the inner workings of the psyche and face the questions it raises. After all, what really turns a child into a killer? Where does coldness come from? When does pain stop crying out for help and start fighting back? This final interview did not bring peace. It did not bring forgiveness, but it did bring an important piece to understanding the journey, a piece that reveals the brutal impact that abandonment can have when mixed with silence, anger, and a childhood that was never saved. He did not apologize, he did not cry, he just told. And in that coldness there was more suffering than in any rehearsed tears. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what he said there in that cell reveals more than just a crime. It reveals a cycle, a repetition, a generation that bleeds inside while the world pretends that everything is fine. And understanding this is facing the most uncomfortable reflection, that often evil is born within the home, not by choice, but by consequence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we think the story has reached its bottom, the truth opens up an even darker basement. It wasn't just omission. It wasn't just a father who pretended not to see. His silence had an owner. It had a purpose. There was a past buried under layers of lies that, for years, were protected with as much zeal as the dirtiest secrets. During the investigation, a name began to appear with disturbingly familiar frequency. A name that appeared in old reports, in forgotten files in the drawers of a rural police station. Fragile, yellowed, ignored files, but alive, and there he was. The same man who spent his entire life saying, "This is nonsense." The same one who crossed his arms while the screams echoed through the house. He had already been reported before, years before the first disappearance. Even before his son learned to speak, the shock came not only from the revelation itself, but from the complicit silence that accompanied it all. The complaints made by neighbors, by distant relatives, by a teacher who once saw marks that should not be there on such a small body. Everything was hushed up. Everything was neglected. The system failed. But worse, it chose to fail. Because on the other side, there was a well-known surname, there were relationships, There were hidden agreements. And silence became a bargaining chip. And then the most disturbing question arises. Was the monster born? Or was he trained? Because when a father carries in his own history the weight of having been an aggressor and remains unpunished, intact, exempt, what kind of example does he set? What kind of mentality does he build in the son who watches him? The boy grew up not only seeing his mother's pain being ignored, he grew up seeing the aggressor being spared. And perhaps without realizing it, I learned that pain doesn't matter. That violence is power. That silence is survival. This revelation changes everything. Because it makes it clear that he did not act in a vacuum. It was not an isolated outburst, nor a rootless deviation. It was an inheritance, a cycle that repeats itself, a lineage of shadows that perpetuates itself in silence. He did not point the finger at his father out of anger. He pointed the finger because, somewhere inside himself, he recognized the origin of what he carried. The same blood, the same cold gaze, the same disregard. And there is something even crueler about all this. Because if the father had been held accountable at the time, maybe the son would have had a chance. Maybe he would have escaped this twisted formation, this distorted vision of justice and pain. But no one wanted to see. No one wanted to change the structure that sustained that silence. And what could have been interrupted there ended up being replicated. It's not just about crime. It's about legacy, about what we transfer without realizing it, about what we normalize within our homes. Evil doesn't come in through the window. Often, it's already sitting at the table, drinking coffee with the family, smiling at visitors, pretending to have a stability that never existed. And that's the most disturbing thing, realizing that some monsters aren't born. They're created. And worse, taught. There are entire families marked by this. Generations that carry the silent pain of shelved abuse, inherited traumas, fears passed from father to son as if it were part of the DNA. And silence, once again, appears as the main character. Always silence. Not the innocent silence, but the silence that hides, that protects the wrong. That silences the right. If you know someone who carries the weight of a hidden family pain, someone who grew up under the control of a secret they could never tell, write the word inheritance in the comments. Because there are pains that transcend time and continue to burn as if they happened yesterday, just seconds before the needle pierced his skin. When the death clock was already ticking backwards, he asked for one simple thing: to come closer. No extravagant last meal, no apologies. Just this one last whisper. The jailer hesitated, but he leaned in. He listened. He just listened. What was said there was never recorded. No camera caught it. No microphone picked it up. Only two people. No, one of them died seconds later. The other left the room without being able to look anyone in the eye. The hardened man, accustomed to convicts, to screams, to blasphemies, left with his head down, his face wet, absolute silence. And he never spoke of the subject again. That's where the real mystery began. What can someone say, in the very second before he dies, that makes a man crumble? What kind of truth did that whisper carry? Was it a confession? A name? A memory? A secret buried with him? Or a warning? The strangest thing is that, hours after the execution, the father disappeared. Just like that, he disappeared. Without a trace. The house was empty. His cell phone was turned off. No bank transactions. As if he had vanished into thin air. As if he had fled from something that was about to come to light. Or as if he was finally facing the weight of what he had avoided for his entire life. The police treated it as a common disappearance, but no one believed it. Because the details were too blatant, he left in a hurry, but without taking anything. And the most curious thing, before leaving, he destroyed his own room, as if he was looking for something. or erasing something, as if he had heard something in the ear of a son condemned to death. That forced him to run, some say the whisper, was a name. Others swear it was a forgotten memory, something from childhood that only the two of them knew. There are those who believe it was an even darker revelation, something that not even the investigators had discovered. Something that involved more people, more victims, a web of pain much larger than anyone imagined. And there are those who say it was forgiveness, a forgiveness that came too late, and that broke the last thread of control the father still had. The truth is that no one knows, no one saw, no one heard. But everyone felt it. The atmosphere grew heavy, the air thick. Those words changed something inside that man, inside that cell, and maybe inside all of us. Because if there is something more disturbing than the scream, it is the whisper. Because the scream is heard, the whisper is felt, and it echoes in the darkest corners of the mind. Those words were never revealed, but they live on. And they continue to corrode. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this final silence, this void left by an unrevealed secret, says more than 1,000 shouted confessions. And perhaps, in this space between what was said and what will never be repeated, lies the last missing piece to understand the true face of this story. If you've come this far and felt that this whisper touched you in some way, if you've ever carried secrets you've never told or felt the weight of unspoken words, write the word in the comments, shadow. Because sometimes, what is not revealed is what screams the loudest, and this is not over yet. If you've stayed this far, it's because something really touched you. Maybe it was the unspoken whisper. Maybe it was the pain that has dragged on for generations. Or perhaps it was the silence of a father that shaped what came after. Whatever the reason, you felt it. And when we feel it like that, so deeply, it's because we carry some part of it inside us. If this video made sense to you, if it awakened something inside you, subscribe. Because everything that comes after continues to unfold these layers. We don't tell stories here just to shock, but to reveal what many people pretend not to see. And your subscription isn't just a click, it's what allows these truths to continue to be told. Without filters, without fear, with courage, and if any part of your story also carries echoes of pain, of injustice, of something that no one wanted to hear, write it in the comments. I'm with you until the end. Because this phrase is not just a sign that you have come this far. It is a silent pact between those who feel, understand, and do not look away. If leaving a like now makes sense, do it, because each like shows that there are still people who want to break this cycle. People who don't accept silence as an answer. People who believe that justice can also begin this way, with a story well told and well heard. There's a video here on the side that complements this one. It's like a missing piece, a detail that you'll only capture if you continue. Click and stay with me there, because what was revealed today, is just the surface of what's yet to come.